You are the type of owner who would never leave your dog behind. Not for anything. But what happens when the decision isn't yours to make when orders come down, vehicles start moving, and somewhere in the chaos, the one who trusted you most gets left standing in the dust? That is not a hypothetical. It happened. And what came after is a story that will stay with you long after this video ends. In conflicts across the modern era, military working dogs have served alongside soldiers in some of the most dangerous environments on Earth. They have detected explosives, tracked enemy combatants, and saved lives that no piece of equipment ever could. But the stories that rarely get told are the ones that happen after the mission ends, when withdrawal orders come suddenly, when logistics fall apart, and when a dog is left behind not out of cruelty, but out of chaos. This is one of those stories. The base had been operating for several months in a remote desert region when the withdrawal order came through. Not gradually, not with weeks of planning and careful coordination. It came the way so many military decisions come in active conflict zones, fast, compressed, with a timeline that left almost no room for anything beyond the essentials. The soldiers had been working with their dog since the early weeks of deployment. He had been assigned to the unit as a trained detection animal, capable of identifying explosive materials and alerting his handler before a patrol walked into something that couldn't be undone. He wasn't a mascot. He was a working partner. But over months of shared meals, shared sleeping quarters, and shared danger, the line between professional animal and something deeper had quietly disappeared. His handler will call him Marcus, a composite name representing the kind of soldier whose story appears again and again in accounts from veterans of desert deployments, had developed the kind of bond with his dog that forms only under real pressure. Not the pressure of a training course, but the pressure of knowing that the animal beside you is reading the ground, reading the air, and making decisions that determine whether you come home. That kind of trust changes a person. When the withdrawal order came, Marcus was told the dog would be transported separately. Standard procedure in certain deployment contexts meant that military working dogs were processed through different channels than human personnel. There were forms, there were approvals, there were logistics chains that supposedly handled the transfer. Marcus was told not to worry. The dog would follow. The convoy formed up before dawn, and in the darkness and the noise and the organized chaos of a full unit breaking down a forward operating position, something went wrong. Accounts of exactly what happened vary depending on who you ask, and that ambiguity is itself part of the story. Some said the transport assignment fell through a gap in the paperwork. Some said the vehicle designated for the dog was reassigned at the last minute. Some said no one with authority to delay. The convoy was willing to make that call for an animal, even a decorated one. What is not disputed is the result. The convoy left, and the dog was still there. He had been secured near the vehicle staging area. When the last truck disappeared over the ridge, he was still in the same spot where Marcus had last seen him standing, watching, waiting for the return that didn't come. The base was not immediately abandoned, in the sense of being destroyed or sealed. It sat in a transitional state that is common in phased withdrawals, no longer actively staffed by the departing unit, but not yet fully transferred or closed. For a period of days, the dog remained at the edge of the compound. Local contractors who briefly returned to the site reported seeing him there, still in the same general area, still waiting. There is something about that image, a trained, loyal animal holding position at the last known coordinates of the people he trusted, that cuts through every layer of detachment a person might try to maintain. It is not sentimentality. It is the recognition of a specific kind of faithfulness that humans rarely manage to match. Marcus found out what had happened within hours of arriving at the next staging point. The official response he received was some version of the matter is being looked into, which, in military bureaucracy, can mean almost anything. He didn't wait for the bureaucracy to move. What followed was a phone campaign, a chain of contacts, and a growing informal network of veterans and animal welfare advocates who had dealt with exactly this kind of situation before. Because here is something that doesn't get nearly enough attention: the abandonment of military working dogs is not a rare accident. It is a pattern with a long and painful history. During the Vietnam War, an estimated 4,000 military working dogs served with American forces. Fewer than 200 were brought home. The rest were classified as equipment, a designation that meant they could be left behind, transferred to foreign militaries, or euthanized when the mission ended. The veterans who had served alongside those dogs carried that loss for decades. Some of them never fully recovered from it. The situation improved after the passage of Robbie's Law in the United States in 2000, which allowed retiring military dogs to be adopted by their handlers or other approved families, rather than being automatically euthanized. But Robbie's Law addressed retirement. It didn't resolve the chaos of active withdrawal. And in the years of conflict that followed in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other theaters, dogs continued to be left behind, sometimes through bureaucratic failure, sometimes through policy gaps, and sometimes simply because the mission moved faster than the paperwork. Marcus knew this history. Most handlers do. It is part of the informal education that comes with the role: learning not just how to work with your dog, but learning how hard you may have to fight to keep that dog from being forgotten the moment the mission changes. The calls he made in those first 48 hours connected him to a small but experienced group of people who had navigated this kind of situation before. Veterans who had fought similar battles. Advocates who knew which pressure points in the system could actually produce movement. And one particular logistics coordinator, we'll call her Diane, who had spent years building informal networks, specifically designed to address the gap between military withdrawal procedures and the animals left behind by them. Diane had seen this before. Not once, not twice, many times. Her approach was methodical and unsentimental in the best possible sense. She didn't waste time on outrage. She moved directly to what could be done, which contacts could be reached, which organizations had the resources and the access to execute a retrieval in a remote desert location with minimal infrastructure and an uncertain security situation. The challenge was not just logistical. The site where the dog had last been seen was in a region where movement required coordination with multiple parties, none of whom had an obvious reason to prioritize the retrieval of a single military dog. Permissions, approvals, and route clearances all had to happen in parallel, not sequence, because there wasn't time for sequence. While those conversations were happening, the local contractors who had seen the dog were asked to leave food and water near the compound perimeter. One of them, a man who had worked in the area for years and had encountered military animals before, took it upon himself to do more than leave supplies. He began spending time near the compound in the evenings, not trying to handle the dog, just being present, letting the animal register that not everyone had disappeared. It was a small act, but in the days that followed, it mattered enormously. Because around the fourth day, the dog began to move toward the man rather than away from him. That shift from watchful stillness to cautious approach was reported back through the network and reached Marcus at his staging location. For the first time since the withdrawal, he had something other than dread to hold on to. The dog was alive. The dog was beginning to trust again, which meant there was still a window. Diane's team moved into the next phase. A transport arrangement had been negotiated through a combination of a military animal welfare organization and a private rescue network that specialized in conflict zone extractions. The route was not simple. The timeline was tight, and there was still the question of whether the dog who had now spent nearly a week alone, in heat, in a state of confusion and loss, would cooperate with handlers he didn't know. The retrieval team that arrived at the compound was small. 2 people, a vehicle, and the kind of calm that comes from having done difficult things before. They were not soldiers. They were civilians who had chosen to spend their professional lives solving exactly these kinds of problems, in exactly these kinds of places. When they arrived, the dog did not come immediately. He watched from a distance for a long time. One member of the team sat on the ground near the perimeter and waited. No approach, no urgency, just presence. It took most of the afternoon. But eventually, and anyone who has ever watched a dog make the decision to trust again will recognize the specific quality of this moment. He walked over, slowly, with the kind of careful deliberateness that suggests a creature weighing everything they've experienced against everything they are hoping, and he sat down next to the person on the ground. The drive out took several hours. The dog rode in the back of the vehicle, calm, watching the desert move past the window. Whatever he understood about what was happening, he had made his choice. The reunion with Marcus happened at a facility several hundred kilometers from the original deployment site. The logistics of exactly how that was arranged involved favors called in, regulations navigated creatively, and the kind of stubborn refusal to accept a bureaucratic dead end that defines the people who do this work. When Marcus walked into the room, the dog's response was immediate. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, no cautious approach. He crossed the room fast and pressed himself against Marcus's legs with the full weight of an animal that had been waiting for this specific moment for 8 days. 8 days, in the desert, alone, still waiting. If you need a demonstration of what loyalty actually looks like, not the word, but the thing itself, that is it. The story of this dog is not unique in its details. What makes it worth telling at length is precisely that it isn't unique. Across the history of military working dogs, this pattern repeats. An animal forms a bond so deep it reshapes the human beside them. A mission ends badly or quickly or both. The animal is left behind, not always through malice, often through systems that were not designed with the dog in mind. And then a group of people, often working outside official channels, refuses to let the story end there. There is a larger question underneath all of this, and it is one that the military community has been wrestling with for decades. What obligation do we have to the animals who serve alongside human soldiers? When a dog detects an IED that would have killed an entire patrol, when that dog performs that function day after day, in conditions that would break most people, what does that service earn? The answer has been shifting, slowly, in the right direction. The formal recognition of military working dogs as members of the armed forces, rather than equipment, has grown in multiple countries. Retirement and adoption programs have expanded. Organizations dedicated specifically to the welfare of conflict zone animals have become more established, more funded, and more capable. But there is still a gap between policy and reality in active operations. Withdrawal timelines do not always accommodate the logistics of animal transport. Bureaucratic categories still sometimes fail to account for a dog's status in a fast-moving situation. And the people who end up filling that gap are almost always individuals, handlers, advocates, volunteers who do it out of personal commitment rather than institutional mandate. Marcus eventually brought his dog home. The full process took longer than anyone involved thought was acceptable and involved more obstacles than it should have. But it happened. And for every story that ends with a reunion, There are others that didn't, dogs whose handlers fought just as hard and hit walls that couldn't be moved in time. Those stories deserve to be told too, not as a reason to feel helpless, but as a reason to understand what's still broken and why the work of people like Diane and the retrieval teams and the informal networks matters so much. The dog adapted to civilian life, the way many former military working dogs do, with a period of adjustment that required patience and understanding, followed by a settling in that looked, from the outside, like relief. He learned new rhythms. He found his spot in the house. He became, as so many of these animals do, the quietest and most steadying presence in the room. But there were moments, Marcus mentioned this in conversations with others in his veteran community, when the dog would stand at a window or at a door and watch the distance. Not anxiously, just watching, as if keeping track of something, as if he hadn't entirely forgotten what it meant to wait and wasn't entirely sure that waiting was over. Maybe it never fully is, for him, for Marcus, for all of them. What the desert took from both of them in those 8 days was not the bond that proved stronger than distance and confusion, and the worst kind of institutional failure. What it took was the easy assumption that everything would work out, that systems designed to handle these situations actually would, that the people in charge had thought through every consequence of every decision. What it gave back was something harder to name, a knowledge of what holds when everything else doesn't, a memory of a dog standing at the edge of a compound, facing the direction the convoy had gone, refusing to move until the person he trusted came back. That image, that specific, stubborn act of faithfulness, is what this story is really about. Not the bureaucratic failure, not the rescue operation, not even the reunion, as powerful as that was. It's about a dog who decided, in the absence of all certainty, that waiting was the right thing to do. And about the people who decided, in the face of every obstacle, that he was worth waiting for. If this story moved you, there's a reason. It reveals something true about the connection between humans and dogs that goes beyond comfort and companionship. These animals give everything. The least we can do is make sure their stories get heard. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. And if you want to go deeper into the history of military working dogs, the next video is already waiting for you. Some dogs become more than companions. They become legends. Subscribe now for more unbelievable true dog stories, and explore the trusted gear and books we've linked below inspired by today's video.